Hello, everybody. I know this is uh, already an interesting start to this semester with all the issues we're having with Canvas right now. Hopefully, those are fixed by the time uh, you're supposed to watch this. But if not, this video should be mostly review for a lot of you anyway. Those of you that had dramatic lit last semester, this should be review for you. But I feel like it's worth again addressing and going over because it doesn't hurt to refresh and just kind of to review just the general pieces of advice for academic writing. So here, I'm going to spend a few minutes going over or reviewing Orwell's rules for academic writing. As I've said before in your introduction video yesterday, you are writing essays in this class, and these are pieces of formal academic writing. So these would be general pieces of advice that would be beneficial and could help make you a better writer, at least when it comes to academic writing. What? Okay, this is looking weird. Okay, I think that's as good as it's going to get. Anyway, so just some background on George Orwell. So George Orwell, that guy, was a British writer. He started his career out as a journalist. Notably came to prominence as a war correspondent during the Spanish Civil War. But after that war, he began writing a lot of other stuff. He's a noted novelist, writing two of the two famous novels, 1984 and Animal Farm. He's a noted journalist. He's a noted essayist, writing on a pretty diverse array of topics, ranging from politics and political theory to current events to philosophy to general life advice and lifestyle stuff. So Orwell wrote a lot, and through his writings, Orwell has also explained general ideas, general questions, and general rules, if you will, that he followed to try and be a better writer and to elevate his writing. So first off, we're going to look at these 6 questions we should ask ourselves before we begin writing. So that way, questions we should ask ourselves before we begin writing and while we're writing. So that way we have a clear understanding of what our purpose is, and ultimately whether or not our writing is an effective way to express what we're trying to express. So the first question we need to ask ourselves, what am I trying to say? What point am I trying to make? If you don't know what you're trying to say before you start writing, or if you don't know, particularly in academic writing and the analytical essays you'll be writing in here, if you don't know what point you're trying to make before you start writing them, the odds of them being good quality pieces of academic writing are pretty slim. You should have at least a general idea of what point you're trying to make before you start. Then you ask yourself, what words will express it? So what is the best way that I can convey this idea? You ask, what image or idiom will make it clearer? What examples can I include to make my message clearer? Or what language can I use that will make my point clearer? You also need to consider, is this image fresh enough to have an effect? If you're trying to use, if you're trying to include a piece of evidence or a piece of figurative language that will hook your reader and make your reader more engaged in your writing, you have to consider, is this something that they've seen or heard before? If your reader's seen this point before, then it's more than likely it's not going to have the desired effect of hooking them or getting them engaged in what they're reading. Because they've seen it before. Fifth, you need to ask yourself, could I put it more shortly? So in other words, every word should matter. There shouldn't be any fluff or padding to good writing. Every word should matter. This is something that I have struggled with myself in my writing, particularly when I was in high school and when I started college. I always tried to pad my write my essays out to make them longer and make myself sound smarter. And in the process of doing that, all that does is it just adds a bunch of stuff in there that's not really contributing anything, and it's just distracting and taking away from your main point. So, and this kind of gets to my underlying philosophy when it comes to essays and the essays you'll write in here. I generally don't want really long pieces of writing, and I don't set specific page lengths because I personally would rather have to read and grade like 2 or 3 pages of stuff that's good than like 4 or 5 pages of some stuff that's good, but also a bunch of other padding and fluff added to make it longer. If it's not adding anything, take it out. It does not need to be you should emphasize quality over quantity. And kind of going along with that, question 6, have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? So in other words, is your essay clear and easy to understand, or is it as clear as possible? There are some topics that there's only so much you can simplify and so much you can clarify. That generally happens when you get into the more specialized areas of academia, particularly in things like science, where you're dealing with more complicated topics that the average person is just not familiar with, and they don't have the background knowledge to be able to understand it. So, in other words, make sure that your essay is as clear and as easy to understand as possible, and make sure it's as easy to read as possible. So this is where revision comes in. And when it comes to me, I view the best method of revision, or basically editing your essay, once you have it finished, read it out loud. Because in the process of saying what you wrote out loud, your brain is going to be more likely to recognize the stuff that's just awkwardly or poorly worded, and you'll have a chance to fix it. Now, on to his actual rules. So like he had 6 questions, Orwell also has 6 general rules for academic writing. Rule number 1, never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech you are used to seeing in print. That goes back to his question about are the images you're using or the idioms you're using fresh enough to have an effect? If you're using figurative language and it's commonly used, so a good example of that would be like if you're trying to say like it was raining cats and dogs or something like that. That metaphor is older than me. That's everyone, or most people have heard that metaphor over the course of their lives. That's not new. That is not fresh enough to have an effect. So don't rely on tired cliches in your writing, because they're not adding anything, because we're used to them. Okay, rule number 2, never use a long word where a short one will do. Simplicity is best. You don't want to use a lot of really complicated words and vocabulary if you can express those topics more simplistically. Again, the simpler, the more clearer you can make your writing, and the more you can simplify your writing, the easier it is for your reader to understand, or rather, the more likely it is that your reader will understand what you're saying. And if the purpose of writing is to convey information to your reader, that's kind of the big deal. If you can simplify your language to make it easier for the writer to, or for the reader to understand. And again, there are some topics and some concepts where it does not matter what you do or how much you try to simplify. There's only so much you can do. But if possible, simplify. Rule number 3, if it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Again, don't include things in your writing that don't add anything. If it's not helping you make your point, cut it out. It's just taking up space. It's just making it longer for the sake of being longer. It's not helping you make your point. And kind of to give an example of these two in action. So one of my literature professors in college, she told a story after she handed back our first essays where she had kind of ripped us apart. And she told a story about how, with her own writing, at the time she was working on her dissertation to get her doctorate. And she basically shared a comment that her doctoral advisor had left on a draft of a chapter for her dissertation. And it really illustrates how these are important rules, and these really will help elevate your writing. Where her advisor basically comments on this one paragraph or this one sentence that she wrote, where he's like, this is a bunch of bullcrap. You're not saying anything in this sentence. You're just adding stuff on and you're using a bunch of big words to make yourself sound smart, but you're not actually saying anything. And she's like, he was right. So again, just because you're using big words or more professional or more fancy and impressive vocabulary does not necessarily mean you're right. You have a good essay on your hands. They have to be making a point. And just because you have something long does not mean that it's good. Make sure that it's meaningful. Okay, rule 4, never use the passive where you can use the active. So this refers to the verbs you use. In general, you want to use action verbs as opposed to passive verbs. So passive verbs, these would be what we call the to-be verbs. So things like is, are, was, were. Those are passive verbs. So when we use them in a sentence or in context, you would take a sentence something along the lines of the South Park meme is in Mr. Marx's PowerPoint. It's a technically correct sentence, but if we were to replace that and try to use an action verb or active voice, that would make that sentence more engaging and just more interesting for the reader. So I could replace the sentence, the passive sentence of the South Park meme is in Mr. Marx's PowerPoint with something like Mr. Marx put the South Park meme in his PowerPoint. It makes it action. It makes it an active sentence and just a bit more interesting to read. Okay. Rule 3, never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. This goes back to simplifying. If you can express a concept without having to rely on discipline-specific vocabulary, that's almost always preferable. Because that way, somebody who is not in that discipline can understand what you're talking about. So like if you're a scientist and you're writing a paper or an essay or like an article that is meant for general readers, you're going to want to express those complex scientific concepts, not in the official or the technical scientific vocabulary, but you're going to want to use words that express those concepts that the average person will know. So that way the average person knows what you're talking about. Now, this is going to be a bit different if you're writing, if the audience for your writing is discipline specific. So just kind of, for example, when I have to write essays for the graduate program I'm in history, I generally don't bother explaining or simplifying certain historical themes or trends or like events, because in my discipline, in the discipline of history, it's assumed that the audience would know that. But if I were writing that paper for like you guys or something, I would take time to explain it because I would not. It would be irrational and unreasonable of me to assume that you guys would know about like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and the resulting trial of like Harrison Block. So it's unreasonable to assume that. So this will depend on the intended audience of your writing. Last rule, break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. So if you follow these rules and then you reread your essay and it's crap and you just know in your gut and your heart that this is crap, then start breaking them. Because at the end of the day, what's important is that you're satisfied with it and that ultimately you have a quality piece of writing on your hand. Not that I followed all the rules. The rules are just there as guides, but kind of like with everything in English, or kind of like with every rule in English, there are exceptions. So these are just general guides. They're not hard and fast rules. And I have this here because this is generally my attitude whenever I write something, and I generally have this view. You know you're a writer when you're convinced every word of the manuscript you just finished is the worst thing anyone has ever written. It's natural to think that your writing is crap. More than likely, it's fine. But I don't know. If you're like me, you're generally overly critical of your own writing. So just relax. This is not meant to stress you out. This is just meant to give you an idea to try and help you. So don't stress out about it. At the end of the day, it's just an essay. Okay, so hopefully Canvas is up and running by the time I would post this. If you have not completed that movie viewing survey yet, please do so. That will be really important, so that way I can better schedule the time, or more likely times, when I'll be streaming movies while we're virtual, which definitely is going to be Casablanca, the first one, and who knows. So we'll see what happens. All right, take care, guys, and I will see you when I see you.